Hi, my name is Wayne Woodyard. I've been in the business about 30 years. Excuse some of the branding on the handouts. I am with Berkshire Hathaway, but I am training at caravans and different places. So David had asked me and Andrew to come in and talk to you guys. I am vice president of SDMLS. I just came from their meeting, actually. Our meeting there with our new rules. So SDMLS is removing compensation as of August 12th. CRMLS, who belongs to SD versus CR in here? SD. Most of, and who's CR? Okay, so kind of a mix. So CR is the 13th. There's going to be a couple different discrepancies between CRMLS. CRMLS is taking a little more bold move. The Department of Justice, and I'm just going to give a little history. I think a lot of people are pissed off at NAR and CAR for how this all happened, but the Department of Justice started this whole witch hunt against the real estate industry back when President Trump was in back then. And so that was the first piece of this whole puzzle that is now coming together, or unraveling, one of the two. Then under Biden's administration, it just continued, and it's not just real estate. You know, their administration's been trying to pick apart Apple and everybody else. So the DOJ is not finished yet. They have just reopened some cases. They have a civil investigation into CAR. That's why the forms changed. And most of the large brokers out there as we speak right now, because they are looking for California, because California leads the way. And that's why they changed this compensation, because in some other states, they're still allowing broker compensation, not in the multiple listing service, but they are offering it broker to broker that we've always paid. So we are taking the stance that we don't want to be the next test case in California, and we want to protect all of you, because by the settlement, all of you are protected under that settlement and you can't be sued. At SDMLS, we are taking the same stance, and we're trying to protect all of you as well. So that's kind of how we're going. There's going to be a few different changes. SDMLS will not have a yes or no field if the seller wants to offer a concession, but you're going to call to show the property anyway, most likely, or just write the property. I'm going to show you today how just to write it easily. If you know, a lot of agents won't answer their phones anymore. How many people see that? You know, nobody will communicate with each other. So if you don't know what compensation that or a concession that the seller has agreed to, you might as well just write the offer and attach your documents and your buyer representation agreement and move forward with it. So that's the piece of the puzzle there. So our current co-op compensation structure was like this, as you see here. We had the seller and the listing agent when you listed a property. And so some of these slides are going to be in your handout and some aren't, but the important ones are going to be there along with the important forms I'm going to go over. You entered it in the MLS. The listing agent agrees to a co-op share of the compensation at, you know, whatever percentage it is. We're not supposed to talk in round numbers for antitrust, but for all intensive purposes of this training, you can see what's on the screen. There was someone at the marketing meeting on yesterday in Coronado. He's like, well, my seller's offering like 2.5 bananas, you know, so he was talking in banana terms, you know. So I think all of the Realtor Association meetings, like the Metro meeting and Scripps Ranch, all those meetings that are sponsored by a Realtor Association, the North County meeting, they're not going to want people talking about how much compensation is going to be out there. You can say, my seller's open to a concession, please call me for details, because then we can get into some antitrust pieces, because I know certain companies like EXP, Coldwell Banker have created their own listing agreements, and they're trying to use those as recruiting mechanisms for other brokerages, which they're saying, we found a path to do it. Well, there's a freaking path right here with you don't need to create a new agreement. I mean, it's ridiculous. So, but anyway, then the compensation was shared, and then we went into escrow. We closed escrow, and then the seller, then we had a compensation from the proceeds through the listing agent and the buyer's agent. So that's kind of was in the past. So let's just put that out of our memory, because we've only got 12 more days because the compensation is, who's taken a listing in the last couple days under the new form? Great. And how did you guys do that?
Please sign.
Yeah, please sign. And then what kind of a conversation did you have with your seller about what you might want to offer out?
So this one was I've done 17 contracts for this person.
Okay.
So they said, they told me what they want to offer.
Okay.
They're like, we want to offer this and make sure everyone knows.
Perfect. Okay,
So that
good.
was their approach.
And that is their approach, and a seller can do that. What about someone else? Did anybody else? David?
3% for the seller, for my side. But
Yeah.
I told them verbally that there's going to be offers coming in with SPVs.
Yes.
That say 2% and 2.5% on them, so they need to be prepared for that.
Perfect.
Providing them net sheets with 2 and 2.5%.
Okay.
So they know what to pay.
Good. Good. So different net sheets. Perfect. I love it. Okay. Anybody else had a different scenario? Okay. We are good. So let's move on to the next piece. So the traditional format ends. I put August 12th because that's SDMLS. For the CRMLS people, it's the 13th. Each MLS will change in different timelines. So there are 40 MLSs in California. So each of those will have their own timeline up until the 17th of August. So you can see that was our traditional format. So our new structure, which everybody knows, beginning August 12th. And is this the first time anybody is seeing this training? No?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Good. Okay. So you're going to have two different paths here. So you're going to have two different pieces that you're going to have a listing presentation and you're going to have a buyer presentation. Does anybody have a buyer presentation now that they have been traditionally using with their buyers? So when you think about a listing presentation, you build your value proposition. So how do all of you, do you think you all have great customer service?
Yes.
Let's see your hands. Who all has great customer service? Okay. Well, that's not a differentiator. So how are you going to differentiate from you and you and you on how you sell a house? And David and Andrew, what's your differentiation? You know, you have a specialty. You know, if you're a downtown specialist and you know all the buildings, that's maybe your specialty. If you work with flippers, that's maybe another specialty. But you have to build your value, and that's what you're going to be doing when you are meeting with your buyer to secure the buyer's broker compensation. And then you have your other form when you're with your seller on the listing agreement. And so then when your seller, you're going to put it in the MLS, and then there's going to be a house that's in the equation. And there's just one simple question. Does the seller want to offer anything out when an offer comes in? And there's a couple ways to negotiate that, and I'll show you. There's 3 ways to get paid, and we're going to show you that too. And then over here, you have a buyer, and then you have your offer, and then that's going to go to that property here. So on the offer, there's different ways you can negotiate it. So you're always going to have a price, a term, a concession, possibly. Now, what's a concession in the old way of doing real estate?
Credits for repairs.
Correct. And you put those in usually at the end of the deal. In the MLS, a lot of agents don't do that, but some, you know, it's garbage in, garbage out. We need to have good data, so I'm always a proponent of let's put in the right data so we can, you know, have apples to apples. Your payment to buyer broker, which is 3G3, and you're going to hear me talk about 3G3 today in the purchase contract because I think that is the ideal way to train yourselves to get the comp through. Because if you're going to use, there's another way, which is 3G1, which I'm going to show you, but the 3G1 concession route is just a lump of money that the seller can say, I'm going to allocate that to whatever the buyer wants. Well, if you allocate that and in most cases it's going to be for compensation, but the seller, when you come in for a request for repair, may say, hey, why don't you, Mark, take a little bit of money out of your compensation to pay for your buyer's repairs because I gave you a lump sum. But if you negotiate it through 3G3, which I'm going to show you in the SPBB, which is the seller payment to buyer's broker form, it will automatically be stipulated that it's for the buyer's broker compensation, and you'll need to have your buyer representation agreement there for you. A lot of agents have had questions about what happens when I'm holding an open house? What do I do? Do I have to get this form signed? Well, when you're holding an open house, you're there behalf of the seller. And so you are there showing that property on behalf of the seller. So technically, the buyer that walks through the door doesn't need to have a representation agreement. The key for a representation agreement to be formed, think about who was here in COVID when was in real estate during COVID? We had the PED. It's similar to the PED, but you don't have to keep doing one for every property unless you make them property specific when you go out. So if you're going to arrange a showing or arrange a tour, you need to have that representation agreement signed in advance. That is the rule. Now, certain brokerages, I see Zillow has like a free look for however many days they're offering. You know, you're independent contractors. You guys can do your own business the way you want to do it, but it's an MLS violation if somebody would report you if they found out, and that's a $2,500 fine, which isn't fun. And there's no protection if that buyer calls their aunt in Orange County to write the offer on a house you show. So just know that you should have that signed, have that conversation up front. A lot of you get a Zillow lead and they're like, hey, meet me at this property, I want to see it. And then what do? So you still need to get a form signed. You can either DocuSign it to them, you can meet them at the house and explain it to them, and do that. Or you can decide on your own to give them a free look. I don't recommend that, but you need to talk to your brokers here and see how they're training you to do that, because I don't want to have, and if I'm conflicting with any training, David or Andrew, hit me with a cattle prod or something here. Oh, you got the bag. Yeah. David already said I moved over here to be on this side, and he's like, don't worry, I got a wide angle lens. I'm like, oh, thanks, David. But anyway, so then you have your counteroffer, you go into escrow, and then you have, if your buyer's gonna pay, there's 3 ways to get paid. So the buyer can pay your comp, you can negotiate it and have the seller pay your comp, the buyer's agent comp, or it can be a combination thereof. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do this and facilitate that. Yes?
Will that be noted on the MLS so that we know whether the purchase prices are different because of buyer compensation or not, whether the seller pay versus whether
so in the confidential remarks, the settlement agreement allows for an agent to put in seller will consider concessions. And so you're not going to have an amount. You're not going to know what that is.
Once it's sold, so once it's closed,
Unfortunately, that's one dilemma of the settlement agreement. There's not going to be any historical data for compensation. So you're going to have the phone call. And think about an appraiser's job now. Because before, the appraisers didn't consider comp because everything was supposedly had comp. So what are we, how are the appraisers? This is a whole new world for everybody.
Would it show under concessions though? Because is that a concession? Did you put it in?
If an agent puts it in, see, and that's the issue. It's all there's so many concessions that don't get recorded right now. I used to be in Orange County for years, and in that competitive high-end market up there on the coast, these agents like to keep all the information for themselves. And I'm sure in all of your farms that you guys farm in, there's agents that you compete with that don't want to put all the data in because they want to keep it all to themselves so they look like the hero when they go on a listing appointment. And I don't think that's right. I think we should all share. There's enough business. Well, there used to be enough business for everybody. But I think there's going to be, because NAR says this whole piece here is probably going to flush about 500,000 agents out of the business, which I'm applauding because they need to go. All of you that are showing up today are going to be the ones that are successful. You guys are all young. You should see the agents I usually talk to. Good Lord, I'm old, but they're a lot older than me, and they're just like looking at me like, what? But anyway, So this is kind of what we're going to focus on today. The buy side, establishing buyer representations, writing offers post-settlement, which would be after August 12th, listing properties post-settlement, and negotiating with unrepresented buyers. Unfortunately, CAR left in that piece in the listing agreement about having the seller give you extra compensation to facilitate an unrepresented buyer, which makes no sense, and they didn't even leave a spot for if you were going to represent the buyer as a dual agent. So dual agency is under scrutiny at CAR. The majority of people don't want dual agency to be allowed anymore because they fear that the buyers are going to go directly to the listing agent. So how do you guys feel about it? Just as a straw poll, do you think there should be dual agency allowed?
If I'm the listing agent, yeah.
Yeah.
If I'm the buyer's agent.
If you're a listing agent, yeah. If you're a buyer's agent, no. But I have a feeling California will be one of those states that will probably legislate it. As of January 1st of 2025, there will be a new law in California where you have to have a buyer representation agreement. Just because we've had these agents who say, I'm going to withdraw from NAR, but if they're a member of the MLS that is under the settlement agreement, they have to follow the rules. But there are some brokerages that are exempt from that and they don't use the MLS and they're thinking that they're going to withdraw. Well, the new law will level the playing field as of January 1st.
Do you know if currently most markets favor dual, or are they
outside of California or even San Diego?
There are many states that don't allow dual.
Yeah, what, like 30%, 70%?
Oh no, I would say probably 30%.
Yeah.
The majority of them allow it in some way, shape, or form. So it's going to be interesting, and I think this is the time for all of us to let your voices be heard, because the problem with our industry is we all get busy and we're not involved. I'm a director at California National and a lot of other places, as you heard from. I'm a director at San Diego Association of Realtors. And so I have always gotten my voice heard, and that's how David met me. I was training at the Coronado meeting. That's how rent control takes hold in these communities, because everything starts at the local level and moves up. So, the mansion tax they're trying to do in San Diego now, which is freaking ridiculous. And the mansion taxes now are going across the nation and all these different, so I don't want to be political, but I'm just saying, let people hear your voice so everyone knows how you feel, especially when they start to bring up dual agency, because you're going to start to see that in some messaging from CAR. So don't just delete that message like a lot of times we do because we're busy. We've got chairs. There's one up here. He doesn't want to be in the front row.
I don't mind.
There's one right here. It's a lot of leg room too. It's like the exit row.
I didn't bring an apple. So
You're good. An apple. Yeah, you've got the exit row seat. You're good. So anyway, we're going to be talking about listing properties post-settlement. Did you grab a handout on the way in?
packets were out. They'll have to eat.
I have an
Perfect.
extra one in.
Yeah. So anyway, so the changes to the draft, they removed the CBC. I think everybody knows that the cooperating broker compensation form, the way we used to facilitate our compensation for an off-market property, or if you were going to do anything different, we use this form. Now, this has been discontinued. It's no longer in the forms database. So that has been removed. Thus, everything is now negotiated through the purchase agreement. So we're going to be on to our listing. We're going to be, there's going to be bundles now. So I'm sure you've looked at the bundles. So when you look at a listing agreement, you get the broker compensation advisory as well. So when you list the property now, the seller has 3 considerations. They can offer a concession up front. They don't have to offer a concession up front. They can just negotiate it through the purchase agreement. Do they want to have you facilitate an offer with an unrepresented buyer. And at the end of this, I'm going to show you a couple things that you can give to a buyer that says, I want you to represent me. And if your seller says, okay, I'm open to it, because that could be maybe the only offer they get, who knows? But in the market that we're in, I can't imagine that. But if you're in downtown San Diego in the gas lamp, you can't give a condo away. They're just sitting on the market right now. It's like ridiculous. But it's just certain areas, you know, sit, you know. So anyway, so there's some pitfalls to an unrepresented buyer, especially for the seller and especially for you as the agent, because you're walking a tightrope the entire time. So I'm going to show you a couple different forms you can give them. And when you're listing it in the MLS, it'll no longer include any co-op compensation in the MLS, nor can it have any link to something that could have co-op compensation. So a lot of times you might have people put documents in the MLS for up in our Santa Barbara market. They put in, which is kind of interesting, offer instructions. So a lot of times they tell you, you know, this is what you need to have in your offer, and there's just a document on every listing. And the agents will say, well, we'll just put it in there. Well, you can't, because it's in the MLS. So you can't put it there. You can't link your private, your single party website, your say if it's 123 Main Street, you can't put it on there and link it to the MLS. So just be careful. And I would say, since the new rules have even changed the second time from CAR, I would probably not promote a dollar amount on anything in print, because there's going to have a lot of agents that never got training like this, or that don't even know that this is happening. So you're going to have someone file a complaint against you at the association saying, you know, they said it was this and I only was paid that when we negotiated the deal. So nothing's binding until it's negotiated in the contract. So, and I think your seller would probably say, well, why do you want to show our hand right away? You know, you're not, it's like a poker face. So it's a different land now. I think listing agents can probably give themselves a raise now, because when you go in and you used to say, I charge X, or say, let's just use a round number. I used to charge 6%, but now I only charge 3%. That sounds pretty damn good, 3% instead of 6. But most people usually charge a little bit less than 3. So, you know, I think listing agents can get a raise if you do it right and have the right, you know, dialogue in there. You can promote it on flyers and signs. Have you seen any sign writers that say concession available? You can do that. You can do it in an email and other website mechanisms. You can put it on your own website, and your company can put it on the website. You know, a yes or a no, or however the company wants to do it, if you want to do that. So you can put it there, just cannot be in the MLS any place. Any questions, guys? Awesome.
I have a question,
Yes.
of.
Sure.
So I'm in a few other markets, and there's this platform called ZenList.
Uh-huh.
It exists out here. Are you familiar with it?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like an IDX search site that agents use.
Mm-hmm.
Pair your buyer with it.
Mm-hmm.
It gets them off the MLS, and it becomes like your own branded Zillow.
Yeah.
Right. And some markets that I'm in, Chicago specifically, and Tampa, they're doing this. A lot of the agents are now using that in lieu of the MLS, and you're searching listings on there, and the co-ops are still there.
Those will have to be removed as of the 17th as well, because that's an anything that's fed via an IDX feed is against the settlement agreement.
So if it has IDX, you can't do that.
Correct.
Got it.
And people were thinking, oh, we'll put it in showing time. Can't do that either.
And when you say on other websites, it just can't be.
It can't be via IDX. So
It
if
can't be listing specific.
correct,
It can be in the content of the website, like all these listings have a.
it can be on your own website.
Got it.
Because that's yours. You're not feeding your website out via IDX to someone else. A provider into the MLS, correct?
No. So ZenList pulls from the MLS.
Yes.
Yeah, if they're receiving data from IDX sources, are they allowed to?
It will not, if they're receiving their data from the MLS, it will not be there. So the agent would have to go in and put
So
it.
Zenlist allows it to pull from the IDX, and then you can edit and add other details.
Correct. So every MLS will strip out compensation, and the IDX feeds will still be there, but there will not be any comp field.
Right.
So there might be a flag seller is considering yes or no, depending on the different MLS. But then the agent can go back in on their own personal website
Sure.
and put in comp if they wish.
Okay.
It just cannot be linked back to the MLS.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And when you're saying comp, you mean like the actual
Compensation,
percentage?
yeah.
But the actual percentage, like we're able to list offering 2.5%.
You could.
Actual numbers.
You can put a number in your own advertising. I probably wouldn't, but that's your own choice.
That
Just
would be a concession. That's a
Yeah.
correct.
co-op. Right.
But there is no more co-op anymore because co-op is between broker to broker. So, it's weird. There's no more commission either, so commission is gone. So think of it's mainly concession and compensation, and it's between the seller and the buyer or the buyer, So does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's those rules have changed and it's hard to unprogram us. Think of me, I've been in the business 30 years, so to get this all out of my brain, it's going to take me forever.
Well, Compass has their own intranet, right?
They-
There's Compass people here.
We do too,
Yeah.
and we can search our own listings that before they go on the market. Before they go in the MLS, it's like a pre-MLS type thing because under clear cooperation, so any of you that list a property in this room can share it with each other and show it before it goes into coming soon or on the market because you're under the same brokerage. I'm assuming.
We have multiple brokerages.
Yeah.
Oh, you have multiple, so no, scratch what I said. Scratch what I said. No, but if you're with the same brokerage, the same broker, then you could. But but I think clear cooperation isn't going to survive under this, and I'd be glad to see it go away. Let it get rid of it. Yeah. Okay, so the broker compensation advisory, which is in your packet, this pretty much tells you everything you need to know when you're with a buyer or a seller. It's talking about payments for listing brokers in your listing agreements, optional consideration for an unrepresented buyer. A broker may be represented by both the seller with dual agency. Under a buyer representation, it's focusing on compensation and the effect on representation. And the payment option for buyers brokers is direct payment to the buyer, payment by the seller per the purchase agreement. So there's really two ways to get facilitated there to get yourself paid. So this is a great document. Who has gone out on a listing appointment and a seller has not even heard about all of this new stuff? Yeah, I think a lot of us are thinking, oh my God, everybody knows and we're doomed. There's so many people that have not even heard of it. We do because we're in the business. But most sellers have said, I see the value in casting a wider net. And they're not opposed to offering compensation if they get a good offer. But if you get a crappy offer, they don't, they may be offering 2.5. But if Mark writes you a lowball offer, and depending on the market, he might. Your seller may say, well, I don't want to pay that. It's all up to negotiation here.
So you're saying with these changes here, if you're in a negotiation situation and the seller says, I don't like the offering price, let's kick that down from 3% to 2.5%.
Could.
That they could do.
They can do that until you've come to an agreement and the contract is signed.
Because you could always sort of have done that, at some level, because it's not a done deal until you sell.
Well, usually it's our mechanism before was it was dictated by the MLS. The unilateral offer compensation was our multiple listing service. And whatever that said, you were going to get paid if you had an accepted offer. But in order to get there, the seller would usually increase the price.
So you're saying, so I missed some of this. The MLS won't have the percents in there anymore.
No, it's all gone. As of the 12th or the 13th of August. Which MLS are you?
I'm just a renegade broker.
Okay, but do you belong to San Diego MLS or?
Well, I do business all over the place.
Okay, well, so let's just say the 17th for you. There's Renegade. You're no more rules.
I want
So
to comply. I mean, I want to be.
yeah. Well, I'm glad you're here, Renegade. I love it. What's your name?
Fred.
Fred. I love it. Fred the Renegade. I love it.
I like that too.
Okay. All right. So anyway, this broker compensation advisory is great. You've all probably read it. It comes bundled now, but it talks about your additional compensation if the buyer's unrepresented, which I'm going to talk about at the end. You can represent a seller, both buyer and seller with dual agency. You've got your compensation is fully negotiable. It's always been negotiable, for God's sake. You know, it's ridiculous. The requirement for written agreements, so if you have a buyer that's pushing back on you about signing an agreement, have them read paragraph B because it talks about the requirement for written agreements. And so there's going to be a lot of buyers that aren't going to want to sign a representation agreement because they don't know you. They're going to call Mark and say, meet me at this property. He's going to go out and he's going to say, I need you to sign this document. But there's going to be some reluctance because if I never met Mark, I mean, he's a big guy. You know, I'd be afraid he might wrestle me into a deal and say, you're going to abuse me, you know, but he, if I had never, and probably all of you, you need to build some rapport first. So you might make that agreement for a day, a week for that one property because you're protected on that one property, which is good. So, you know, however you're trained to do that, you know, build your rapport because you can't just say you need to sign this and I'm going to lock you into 3 months.
What do you mean you're protected on that one property?
If you're protected under broker involvement, if you show them that property and you signed an agreement and you have an exclusion clause time frame in the buyer representation agreement, which I'm going to show you. If you do it correctly, just like when you take a listing, if your listing expires, David takes that listing and Mark, the other Mark number 2, brings in a buyer that looked at it before. You know, Mark number 1 is going to get paid because he had an exclusion period in his listing for that person.
What if the client then goes to another property, signs another agreement with another agent because they don't fully understand it, and then one of you puts in an offer?
And that's going to be the problem. There's going to be multiple, I think in this bumpy 6-month period, there's going to be buyers that don't realize what they're signing.
And secondly, on that, what protection do we have if they go away and want to sue us because we coerced them into signing an illegal and binding document that they didn't understand?
So if there are going to be unscrupulous agents out there that are going to say, before you can see my open house, you have to sign this, which is not, that is not the rules. And that would be an ethics violation. And, you know, so they could be disciplined by the local association, the DRE, for ethics and that type thing. So that would be the avenue there. And the buyer probably should take action and file a complaint with the Department of Real Estate because the only way we're going to police our industry is ourselves. I have so many of these agents that come to me and say, oh my God, this agent did this and this and this, and they're so unethical. I've said, well, then file a complaint. What can I do about it? I can't do anything about it.
The only nervousness I have about it, because they did this in Europe about 10 years ago, was what the backlash afterwards for.
That's why agents don't do it, because they're like, I'll never get another offer accepted again. I mean, think about if you took David to the board. Do you think he's going to let you get an offer accepted? No, I'm kidding.
So for your representation agreements, you meet someone for the first time, like you said, a Zillow example. It's probably in your best interest for them to write a representation agreement specific to that one property, and then after that, create a second.
And I'm going to train you to use the exclusive 4-page form, because then you only have to use the modification piece to modify it. If you do the limited version, which is a 2-page, that one's only for 30 days and it only is for 3 properties. And then if you decide to use that, and they fall in love with you and want you to be their agent, then you're going to have to get the 4-pager signed. So if you go through the 4-pager the first time, and then you just can modify it and just keep extending it with the modification of terms form for that. Yes?
So the new rule with CAR is gonna be that you have to have a representation agreement to show a property?
Correct, and that will be a legislated law in California as of January 1st.
And so I guess my couple follow-up questions. I know some people have showing specialists, so that's kind of just like out there. If you have someone else that's showing property to you, does that person have to now sign it? And then you mentioned the Zillow, like get a peek for one day, so I guess that would be out. And the third question is, you mentioned open houses is on behalf of the seller, but I do a lot of open houses for other agents. So technically, I don't have a contract with the seller. How does that work then?
That gets a little sticky, and I would say talk to your broker, but you are there still representing the seller. You don't have a contract with that seller, but you're there helping the agent. Now, there's ways to put you on that deal, but sometimes the seller's not going to want an additional agent on the transaction to have an open house. Because if I ask my seller to put you on my deal, he's going to say, well, why am I putting this guy on the deal? He might be with another company. Can't you do your own open house? You don't want to create that piece. So I would say talk to your own brokerage on how they might want to handle that. Yes.
I would say, like, Jonathan, you're doing one of our open houses. You're included because it's not to the agent, it's to the broker.
Correct. But if you're doing it for another, because we have a lot of agents that do, in the shortage of inventory, they're doing other brokerages open houses because they're friends with the agent. And that's what gets.
A great reason to join our broker.
He was, then I'll come over here. Yes.
Is that, so I walked into an open house this past weekend for a client to look at a property.
Yes.
And I looked down and I was like, fuck, is that a PED? I thought it was a PED at first, but it was a new document. I don't remember what
The open house non-agency form,
Yeah.
mostly.
So
Yeah.
would that protect you in that circumstance if everybody that came in just signed that?
The open house and I'm going to get to that open house non-agency form, and it's called the OHNA form in zip form. That's a great form because it explains what you are doing there, what the listing agent or representative for the listing agent is doing there, what the buyer is there unrepresented, and there are like 8 different lines that people can sign in on. And so then that proves they were there. It's a sign-in sheet, and I think it's a great form because it explains what it is. And that it clearly states, I am not here representing you. Now, a lot of times a buyer falls in love with the property and wants to buy it. So in that instance, then you have to go through your buyer representation agreement, and just as you would with a buyer, you would just flip into that mode and go into that mode.
Thank
right
you.
there. You're welcome. Yes.
Could you,
And
as
then-
the seller's agent, work it into the seller's agreement in a notes section or something that other agencies or other brokers are able to show the property to?
Say, I'm not
So
following you.
the seller would
Yeah.
sign off in
Yeah.
the document
That other agents would hold it open?
that could hold it.
Well, you could have that agreement with your seller. Now, if they're from you can have that agreement with your seller. But I always say talk to your broker first, because when you have other agents from other brokerages, it gets a little sticky, and some brokers won't allow it.
Okay.
So do you think that the OHNA covers that? Because I have a lot of listings and I have lots of different agents from different brokerages.
Okay.
Would that kind of be my catch-all that I should implement?
Well, the OHNA is basically for explaining to the buyer the prospective buyer coming in, the visitor, what everybody's role is there, and they don't need to sign anything, just this form that they're acknowledging what's on the form. I would say talk to your broker if you're probably here, right? No.
EXP.
Okay, we'll talk to EXP because I know they do it. So just ask your broker how they want you to handle that, and if they're okay with just going status quo like they are now. You're welcome. Okay, so this is just talking about when the buyer pays the compensation. So if the buyer's totally going to pay you, because a buyer may have money to pay you and just may want to somehow take a tax write-off. You know, we can't give tax advice. If they want to call it a closing cost and write it off, you know, you have to talk to their tax accountant. But if they do, you just provide your representation agreement to escrow with your instructions. And then when they are doing the cash to close, they're going to put that on the buyer's closing statement for them to bring in that extra cash. And then the buyer negotiates to get it compensated through the buyer's broker, so on the SPBB form. So this form is great. Just go through it. I'm not going to belabor it. And then it also talks about the change in practice relating to the broker compensation. So I think if you're representing a buyer, have the conversation with them in advance, set that stage, and move forward from there. And it just talks about the California Association of Realtor listing agreement no longer provides such offers of cooperating broker compensation, nor does CAR include other forms in its library. They're just a CYA material right here. So the listing agreement. Now, this is where things changed a little bit. If you're familiar with the old listing agreement, I like this better because it mirrors the purchase agreement and it's a grid, which is great. So it's a grid. Your listing period cannot exceed 24 months. I can't imagine why you would be listing something for longer than 2 years. But it cannot exceed 24 months because of that one company that was recording liens for 40 years against properties. It was terrible. So what you doing? Oh no. Anyway, the compensation outlined in paragraph 2C1, which I'm going to blow up in a minute, is for the list side only. 2C2 is for an unrepresented buyer, if you're going to facilitate that, and I'm going to blow that up in just a minute. And all other items are negotiable, and they've been moved to the grid, and they pretty much operate the same. Then the rest, I call it, all these pages back here are the rules, back here. The meat of the contract is in the first 2 pages, which is great. You're no longer having to look through the contract to make sure you didn't miss something. So as you can see here, you put your beginning date here, your end date, your price, you've got your compensation, and you've got any additional compensation. The rule of thumb is any additional compensation you have for an unrepresented buyer shouldn't exceed what you would put in for a dual agency situation. Now, there's nothing, you can't memorialize a dual agency situation, but what you can do is you can have that conversation with your seller and say, remember when we sold your property like you did, you've done 17, and I'm sure you double tripped, a few of those. So just say, remember when we did that transaction, memorialize that in an email possibly, and send it over. So when you bring in that buyer representation agreement, you match it to whatever you agreed to, if you're going to do that. So there's really no other way to memorialize anything else compensation-wise unless you put it in other terms and conditions, which we don't recommend, but that's another question for your broker on how they want to manage your risk there. You can see down here in section E, it talks about MLS and public marketing. Seller instructs broker not to take or use photographs. That's the piece if you have a high-end property and they don't want you to be putting those photos of their property on the MLS. You can check that box. And then you put in here what MLS you belong to. And then the MLSA form here, the multiple listing service addendum pre-populates with it. And that form is also in your packet here. And what the MLSA did is they just took the MLS information out of what we had in the contract and moved it to this addendum with some edits. So it's all MLS information has been removed. The form will be required for all listings. And basically what it talks about is the public marketing of the property. And if you're going to be using an seller exclusion, say it's not ready to go on the market yet, the seller instructs the broker to begin marketing the property on a certain date. So if you need repairs, you're going to be putting it on a certain date. To not market the property to the public, and then it says you need to use the SELM. So if you have a seller that doesn't want it in the MLS, that's going to be section 3D3 right here. And then this, if you are in an MLS that doesn't have clear cooperation, we aren't, so you just ignore that. And then this is just showing you the different spots here where you can put in your different dates. just like you did before. Yes.
So I got my listing agreement signed on July 2nd.
Okay.
And it's active tomorrow.
July 2nd under the old form. Okay.
And then it's active tomorrow. Do I have to update anything?
The only thing you're going to need to do if it's active tomorrow is just get the form DMLA, which we're going to go over, which is the disclosure and modification to the listing agreement. And what that's going to do is it modifies the MLS language, just putting your seller on notice that what they were offering is going to come out of the MLS, but they can still offer it, but it's just not going to be advertised in the multiple listing service anymore.
Let's say it's still sitting, let's say, until August 17th, right?
Uh-huh.
How does that?
The DML, it'll just, the compensation will automatically disappear on the 12th or the 13th for all of you, if you're in San Diego. And the DMLA takes care of that. And your office will probably be asking for that form because you just need that form to be compliant with it, and it cleans up the language. Yes?
So I'm not seeing anything on here that goes over a concession in price and how much is allotted for that. Are we not signing anything saying that the seller will allow this concession up to this?
Correct. So you aren't. And that was the change. So what a lot of companies have done, I know EXP has created their own agreement that addresses it. We at our company, I know Compass did, I know Coldwell Banker did. We have an addendum to the listing agreement. If the seller wants to memorialize something in stone, we have an addendum that the seller can sign that basically, has some legal verbiage on it. I can share it. I thought I brought it with me, but I can read it to you from my phone. But you can talk to your broker about that as well and see if they're going to have something, because there isn't a way to memorialize that right now. And so the way that you do it is, how are you guys doing it, Andrew? Email. And that's
I put it in other terms in a listing agreement the other day. I just said seller to consider a concession of up to X.
Yeah.
Is that not?
Well, CAR advises against it, and so does our company. For the reasons why, if we're doing an addendum, I don't know why it can't be in the other terms.
Even if it's not called compensation, it's called a concession.
We'll consider an amount up to blank, or a percentage.
Still frowned upon to do it that way.
It's not robbery. I just relieve them of their things. It's like
Right. Yeah.
See, I think what everybody is, that the reason why you don't want it in the listing agreement is the DOJ explicitly did not want the seller to be obligated for a certain dollar amount up front.
Yeah.
And when you're putting a certain dollar amount in the listing agreement for the other side, it's not obligating them because it's still negotiable, but it's kind of saying, well, Mr. Seller, you told me that we were going to offer this. So do you see what it's one of those things that everybody's dancing around because we know there's going to be another change, and we're just trying to dance around it.
Sure. Because the concession box on the MLS, at least right now for SDMLS.
Correct.
It says percentage or dollar amount.
No, that was CRMLS, and that's gone.
It's gone.
They removed it because it was a slippery slope.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
You can put something like this on the top, a tabletop in the property.
Most definitely, as QR code, you could.
Got it.
Yes. Yes.
So is the idea behind this, for the amazing people that created all of this, that we're gonna be negotiating it and the seller is to negotiate it each offer that comes in?
Yes.
And that's how it should be done. Obviously, we're trying to figure out ways
Correct.
to work around this,
Exactly.
but trying to get behind this.
They want each and every offer negotiated. They want the buyer to be able, they want it transparency. So the seller's paying this, the buyer is paying this, or the DOJ doesn't want the seller to be able to contribute one dime over here. That's where they're going. That's how extreme it is. Think about the first-time buyers and everybody else. Every one of us scraped every last dime together initially to buy our first property.
We have an agent right now who's showed a client houses for 7 months.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now they know this is going on, and they're like, I don't want to deal with you anymore. Thanks for showing me these houses and writing me offers that failed. Yeah, now we're just going to go straight to the listing agent because we don't want to deal with any of this.
Well, and exactly. So that's what Mark just said is why a lot of people think dual agency should be for people, for the mentality of the buyer that wants to do that.
Who's going to protect the buyer then against, because the seller's agent's the one that's going to want to negotiate as much money as possible.
Well, exactly. The seller's agent is supposed to get the most for the seller.
But when you become a dual agent, you're just the messenger. You're no longer anyone's
correct.
advocate or anything.
But then, really the point is, as buyer's agents, educating these buyers. So, you know, maybe your
Yeah.
agent could have educated them better, that you
Sure.
won't
Yeah, of
necessarily
course. I
have to pay. You know, so that's really what,
Exactly.
Expectations is the
right.
And-
exactly.
And worth.
I'm good with time, but I don't know how much time you allocated, but what I've learned in these sessions is the questions and the feedback is where most people learn than just listening to me talk.
How
So,
much longer would you estimate is left in your presentation?
another hour. So if you need me to jam, I will. Okay, I can jam.
Go as long as you want, and let's exhaust these people, and they'll leave one by one.
Or do you want us to save our questions for the end?
No, we're good. Let's
And
go.
you said
No.
you have drinks, didn't you?
We have beer.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so anyway, this just goes over the seller concessions, the seller's authorization, and then just remember here, guys, on page 2, the seller authorizes the broker to put in the MLS that the seller's willing to offer concessions. So if your seller wants you to communicate that, check this box. Because if you don't check the box, you guys are awesome. I can't believe you have beer in the office. Shit. Warren Buffett would shit if I had beer in the office. Anyway, photographs. I'm going to zip through this because it's all, but just make sure, this is the piece you guys need to make sure that you check if your seller wants you to communicate this.
What form is that?
This is on the MLSA addendum. Okay, this is the disclosure and modification to the listing agreement if you're going to be making any. This is the DMLA. So your question back there, you took a listing on July 2nd, right? You took your listing on July 2nd. This is the form you're going to be, if you have anything taken on an old listing agreement prior to, I believe it was the 10th of July, you're going to have your seller sign this form if it's still active on the market when it comes out.
So just to be clear, I'm sorry, but the concessions field is staying, just the description as to what kind, how much is removed.
In CRMLS, it's staying. In SDMLS, they're not going to have a concession field, but agents can put in the confidential remarks, and there's most likely going to be a drop down and it'll automatically put the verbiage in there because we want to make sure. SDMLS believes you shouldn't be fined. CRMLS, and I was a board of director for CRMLS, so I know this. They build fines into their revenue stream, so they want you to get fined because $2,500 a pop on an MLS violation is a lot of money. So we're going to have pre-populated verbiage for you. This DMLA is basically just telling your seller that this is what's happening. The MLS rules have changed. Your compensation's going to be coming out. Blah, blah, blah. Now we're going to go to your buyer representation agreement because this is the thing you need to wrap your head around. Let me get through these. Sorry, I should have taken these out. These are just buyer representation materials you can put together. I was going to take that stuff out. You guys probably all have your own. Let me zip through this.
Can you email this pitch deck to anybody, to us? Or
I can.
Yeah.
Let me get through this. Come on, come on, come on. I'm sorry, I should have gotten rid of that.
So in your opinion, if you have a seller that's not gonna be ready to list until like September, mid-September, my thought process was to try and get the listing signed within the next 2 weeks, but do you almost recommend just waiting until after?
I would say get the listing signed because the quicker you can get it signed, that's easy. Then you don't want someone else. Mark's gonna go follow you around. Yeah, he's gonna. Mark's gonna follow you around, and he's gonna be looking for that house. So
What's the address?
I would say get it listed, and then just do an SELM to keep it off the market. Does that make sense? And do the modification after because then just get them under contract. I always tell people don't wait because then people change their mind and list with the neighbor. when they come knocking at the door. There's 2 representation agreements. I'm training you to use this, the BRBC and not the PSRA, because this is the limited one. The difference in the 2 are the limited one is for 3 properties only, 30 days only, and it's non-exclusive. You might as well sign an exclusive agreement with the BRBC for 1 day. Why wouldn't somebody want to sign an exclusive for 1 day? You're showing them one property. It's limited to that property. You want it to be exclusive. And then with an exclusive agreement, it takes a 30-day cancellation, whereas a non-exclusive, it's canceled immediately if they give you notice. So anyway, your buyer representation agreement, it's where they're hiring the buyer's broker to find them properties, just like when you list a property. And these are the pieces here. This is a weird one. These cannot exceed 3 months, not 90 days. So 3 months was the statutory language they wanted in the law. That's why this is 3 months, because 3 months can be different depending on when it is signed, because you have leap year and you have, 28 days in February. And
Which one was the 4-pager that you were recommending?
this one,
Okay.
the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. This is the form we want, that I would train you, and I'm not sure how Andrew and David want you to be trained, but I would train you with this form here. And the property type, you can dial this down to as tight as you want, but the tighter you put it, the more restrictive it is. So if you can put it as 2 counties, because if you're showing property on the verge of Los Angeles and Orange County, or San Diego and Orange County, you can put it for a city, but if you dial it down too much, then you're going to be locked in. Now, for one single property that I was talking about, if it's going to be one house, they called you off Zillow, then you would put it for the following property only, and you could make it for a day or 2 days, however your business practice is, to get them to sign it here.
And where do you put that? The length that you would...
The length is back up here, which is right here. This is your beginning and ending, your date. Yes.
So would you recommend, or do you have to fill out the location, or just leave it blank?
You need to put some kind of a location in there, either a property address, a county. It can't be for the state of California. I mean, it shouldn't be for the state of California. I mean, think about if you're sitting, I always tell my agents, if you're sitting in a jury, in a judge and a jury, and they're going to say, so are you an expert in all of California? They could say that of all of, San Diego County too, but I think San Diego County is better, or 2 counties, but if you lock it in to a certain neighborhood, say you were showing property in Scripps Ranch and that's it, then a buyer could go somewhere else and sign with, I keep using Mark because he's sitting in front of me, but they could sign with him and say they want to look in Coronado, and you don't have a representation agreement anymore because you limited yourself to Scripps Ranch. Does that make sense?
Like, a client wants to meet them, they want to buy specifically in Hemet, that area.
Yeah, perfect.
And then a couple months later, you go, you know what, we actually want to stay in San Diego.
You use a modification and change to San Diego. You don't have to do a whole new page, a whole new form. That's the beauty of this form, because the 2-pager doesn't allow a modification. This one does. And then you can modify the time to stretch it out. Once you get to close to 3 months, you can extend it, and you can change the parameters if they want a different county.
And which one has the different cancellations?
This form can be exclusive or non. This 4-pager defaults to non-exclusive. So you have to check the box exclusive, which I'm going to show you on the next page. When you check the box exclusive, it's a 30-day cancellation. If it's non-exclusive, you're canceled immediately. You still are protected by the properties that you showed them through broker involvement if you have the time frame on here that I'm going to show you here real quick. So if for some reason they had properties that they had signed, say they saw with Francisco, they saw a property on Zillow, and this property Francisco had showed them. So if Mark was going to sign a new representation agreement, he would exclude that property because they have a representation agreement with you. Does that make sense?
Assuming I know about that.
Assuming you know about that, because you may not know about it. So the first question you're going to ask when you're signing up a buyer is,
Have you signed any agreements with any other?
exactly, and they're going to say, oh, I don't know.
Right.
I signed something, but I don't remember. Tell your client if they ever sign anything, take a picture of it.
So say Francisco does a horrible job with his client,
God, Francisco.
right? And his client calls one of my agents.
Yeah.
And he has an exclusive, which requires 30 days to cancel.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, we hate Francisco, he sucks.
Okay.
Sorry, Francisco. And they want to come jump ship and work with one of my agents at my brokerage.
Mm-hmm.
What then happens?
The problem is
They have to wait 30 days.
they're going to have to wait because anything you, if his says San Diego County, and you're showing San Diego County,
Yep.
he can have a claim against the buyer for commission.
Even if that buyer's dissatisfied,
Correct.
Can they do a cancellation?
there is no cancellation for 30 days.
You know.
You have to-
Unless you have two parties that agree. If you both agree and you
Have a
want to
mutual
do a
release.
mutual release, you can. I mean, you have to create that.
and that's
But
just an email.
see your broker. You have to see your broker on that one because that's changing the contract.
So then vice versa, if I meet a client, I'm like, dang, I find them something, but I don't like them because they're just terrible.
Then
Then I could just do immediate.
you can do a cancellation with them and make it immediate, correct.
Okay.
But you both have to be in agreement.
Okay.
Oh,
So, yes, there is.
It's called the COBR.
So that's COBR.
Okay.
See, good. And
You see where
I haven't even gotten there yet. You're
situation
perfect. I love you for knowing that.
Yeah, so if any case the situation was to happen with your client, you would make sure that they sign that cancellation with his
and then
agreement.
client and agent signs
Yes.
and it's canceled.
Correct.
Cool.
Okay, so here's your amount of compensation, 3%. And if you charge any other fees, if you charge an admin fee, if you charge, you're not supposed to charge a TC fee, but a lot of people charge an admin fee and they put in other things in there. You can put, that's where this would go. Remember, your buyer's broker compensation agreement, this form, you can't be paid any more than this form has on it. So if you're showing property to your sister and you're, oh, I'm not going to charge you any comp, I'm going to negotiate it, and you don't put any comp on there, you're not going to get paid because in order to get paid under the new settlement agreement, the amount that's set forth on your buyer representation agreement is what you're going to be paid. So if it's at 2.5, let's say for round numbers, and they're offering 3, you're getting paid 2.5, and the seller is going to keep the difference.
And the opposite way as well. So if they're offering, you want 3 and they're only offering 2.5%, your buyer has to pay the difference.
Then your buyer would be responsible for the difference, or you would make a decision as your own, as you do every day in your own business, to say, well, I'll sometimes there are incentives, like in November and December, because you have a seller for tax reasons needs to close by December 31st. So he's offering a bonus. You can't be paid the bonus if it's going to exceed this. So you have to make sure you do a modification to this to do that. And in most cases, your buyer's probably going to want to split that with you. So,
I would accept less.
yeah, you can accept less. You just can't get paid more.
Okay.
How would the seller know what you wrote in your contract?
Because when you write your offer with your SPBB form, which I'm going to show you, you need to send over your buyer representation agreement. Page 5 of your representation agreement. I think it's 5 pages now, right? It was 4, and yeah, page 5 now has the amount on it, along with your buyer's name and email address and phone number.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So just make sure to block that part out because you're sending all your information over to the other
So the
agent.
angry seller, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Is that for writing an offer or is just you know, accepting?
When you write when you're writing the offer, so you have to send. If you're asking, if the buyer's paying you, you don't have to. But if you're asking the seller to compensate the buyer, the buyer's broker, you as the buyer's broker, you have to send your agreement over.
You can't
Page
leave that
5.
blank. You can't leave the phone number off.
You can. Oh yeah, just don't put it in.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
that's fine.
just don't put, but it's gonna auto-populate from zip
Sure,
form,
we
so
usually
just
do that,
zap it
yeah.
out. Yeah. Does that, so it has to go over along with your form if you're asking for the seller to cover any piece of that. Does that make sense? Okay. So here, make sure you put in this continuation period. So these are broker-involved properties. So procuring cause on a listing, this is the procuring cause basically for the broker involvement. So for instance, if Michelle had a buyer that she had showed property to, and she had showed this property to, and then this buyer went and wrote the offer with Mark, how would she ever know? She probably wouldn't.
No.
But if she sees it goes into escrow and then it closes and she looks at the tax record and it's her buyer, she can go after the buyer for her compensation because she had put a protection period. If you put 0 in here, you have no protection.
But that hasn't changed. That's always been that.
That's always been that way, but just don't leave it blank. There's so many agents that leave this blank, even in the listing agreement. And when they come to me bitching and complaining, I pull the contract and it has 0, and I'm like, you know?
Which that disappears if you sign a mutual cancellation though.
Yes. Non-exclusive or exclusive here. So exclusive cancellation 30 days. Okay, I'm gonna go through this kind of quick, and then we're gonna get to the other form here. But the other thing I wanted to show you here, there is a contractual piece in this agreement. Within 5 days, the buyer is supposed to show you if they have proof of funds to pay their agreement, if they're paying. If you're not going to be negotiating it and they're going to be responsible, they can do that either by showing you a bank statement, or they can complete this BFPI form, the buyer financial preferences, buyer material, no, I forget the form. But anyway, it goes through, you know, how much money they have, blah, blah, blah. All the questions that you should ask them. So that is a contractual thing of this. If you want to enforce it, it's up to you. But it is a contractual piece of this document. If the buyer does not have funds to pay you, you're going to check this box. Buyer does not have sufficient funds to pay the buyer's broker. That's going to put the seller on notice that, okay, if we don't negotiate this, they have no funds. So, yes.
Does that then stop them from, because say they have the funds, but they want the seller to pay it, so they don't check the box.
Mm-hmm.
Does that stop them from paying you later if you don't get it from the seller?
No. It's still a contract with you. It's just letting the seller know they don't have the funds. So,
But it also makes your buyer look like a less.
it makes your buyer look like, I think a lot of buyers are going to be checking that form because they don't want to have to pay it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any, and if you have anything to add?
750 and below, it's gonna happen all the time.
Yeah.
Like, it's
Oh,
gonna-
yeah.
it's-
Oh, yeah.
You're gonna have very few people coming in and saying that they have the funds to close, because
People, when people want a house, you know, like when you want a car, there's ways to find money. You know, they've got mom, they've got dad, they've got Aunt Millie, you know, all this stuff. This is the buyer financial and personal information form. I'm not going to belabor that. That's the form. And then if they're going to purchase with the following loan program that doesn't allow it, even VA allows it after 8/12. You can have a veteran can pay their broker. There's only one, I think it's FDA. I don't think any of you do any agricultural stuff, do you, up in the Central Valley or any place with cows or anything? But I think that's the only one out there. So that was just the VA update that's just showing you that VA will allow
We're
it.
going to go over appraisal shortages and what happens.
Appraisal shortages are going to be an issue too that we can talk about, yes. Just make sure if you're an exclusive on your buyer representation agreement, you have to get this initialed, just like liquidated damages. So make sure if you don't get this initialed, you don't have an exclusive agreement. And then this is where you confirm your compensation, because this is the page that goes over with your offer. Yes?
Back to the BFPI, did you say that it's sent to the seller as well?
The BFPI does not have to go to the seller. It's only for you as the buyer's agent to make sure that the buyer has funds to pay you. Because you don't want to, if the buyer is going to be responsible, you just want to make sure they have cash to close. Talk to the lender about that, because when a lender's qualifying the buyer, some of these lenders are still kind of confused on the whole process too, that I've been finding out. So you need to make sure that they've allowed anything in there for the buyer, because that's going to change their reserves if they have to pay another 20 grand.
Right.
So just, get the lender involved in the whole process.
Personal question, I'm in the process of purchasing a house, I'm not yet, we're looking,
Okay.
me and my husband.
Yes.
Do I need to get one of the buyer agreements signed, him to sign the buyer agreement?
Right now, no, but you will as of the 12th of, so you might as well get him to sign it now.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I would start doing this today, guys. If you're not doing one already, you're going to have more of a loyal buyer. Here's your modification of terms of the buyer representation agreement. It just says the expiration's changed to blank. Can't be any longer than 3 months, and any other changes you want to make to it. Okay, I'm going to get through this so you guys can stop listening to me babble on. But this is writing the offers. So right now, we're going to talk about how to write the offer. So right now, you're just going to be calling, you're going to be calling the other agent to see, I'm going to show your property, what are you offering, blah, blah, blah. Is your seller open to concession? A lot of people have the mindset, and I don't know if you guys are, do you just want them to write the offer with, if someone's not going to ask, you're just going to write it with the SPBB and move forward, right? With whatever they're asking. Yeah, because most sellers are going to offer. That's why I'm not a proponent of yes or no in the MLS, because if it's no, and the buyer wants to write it, you're still going to write the offer. You're probably still going to ask the seller to pay, because who's wrote an offer on a house that says it's as is, your buyer does an inspection and you give them a big laundry list. Yeah, we all do. So it is what it is. So if the seller doesn't like it, you can negotiate the price up if you're going to get an appraisal. It's what the buyer's always paid the compensation, if you think about it, because when you list a property, everything's factored into the sales price. Just like the shirt I'm wearing, they factored in how much it costs to make it in China somewhere. So anyway, so you're going to have all your. Oh, let me get through that. Sorry about that. That was for our role play that we were doing. That's gone. They got rid of this ABCD. Did any of you see the ABCD form that came out before?
No.
Good. We're going to go right by it. So writing offers now. So what you're going to do, and the way I think you should write every offer, is check 3G3 in the purchase agreement on page 1, which is showing that and it's going to auto-populate the seller's payment to buyer broker, the SPBB form, which just says seller agrees to pay the obligation of the buyer's to compensate the buyer's broker under a separate agreement, which is the SPBB, and then you're going to attach your buyer representation agreement with it as well. So that sets that pot of money aside for compensation, and it's not used for a concession, which could be a repair or whatever else that you could use. And you can see here, this is the seller's payment to buyer's broker form. It's a one-page form, and it's basically just showing what is the amount that you're asking for right here on the percentage, or a dollar amount, so you can have a percentage or a dollar amount. It talks about the maximum seller payment obligation, the buyer's representation regarding the compensation, and so this is how you're just going to fill this out. And you're going to put in the property address, the buyer, the seller, what broker you're with, and who is the seller's brokerage. Pretty easy, guys, right? Yeah. And then that's all you really have to do, and this just goes over the maximum payment is not going to be anything more than the buyer representation agreement is going to be. And this represents the date signed by the buyer below. Buyer signed a representation, buyer's broker representation agreement. So if they haven't, that's another issue, because they have to show it to you in order to get paid. What if they write the offer, send you an SPBB form, and don't send you the buyer's broker agreement. They don't have to get paid. You know, so just
now the seller can just counter the commission in a SEO.
exactly. So the seller can do a seller counteroffer or a seller multiple counteroffer, and change the terms. We are training to if you get something in 3G1, I am training to counter out 3G1. I would say 3G1 does not apply. 3G3 applies. Check, and SPBB form will be completed and forwarded along with buyer's representation agreement. That would
G1 would apply if you're doing closing credits or a buy down or.
for a buy down, yeah, it could.
Right.
But if they're just throwing in the amount,
for us.
this shouldn't be compensation. But this can be, you can have your compensation here and a buy down up here. That's kind of what it's intended for.
Right.
So because they don't have to show you their representation agreement if they're going to put it all up here.
Interesting.
They have to show it to escrow to get paid, but they don't have to show it to you unless you request it. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, is one going to look better to an appraiser?
I think this one is, because this one they're specifying this is for compensation, and it's better for the lender because this is going to take it out of the the allowable credits.
Right.
You know. Yes.
Is it gonna show up on the buyer's side or seller's side on the settlement statement?
Yeah.
On the settlement statement, the seller is paying the buyer's broker, so it's going to show up on the seller's side.
So it won't be like with FHA or conventional on the maximum 3%, 6% credit.
No, and that's why that's why if you're going to put it up here and you don't want it to count against any of the lender allowables, you need to specify what it is up here if you're going to put it in C1. If you put it in G1, if you put it in G3, it's already specified that it's for buyer's broker compensation already, so it doesn't hit the lender allowables.
Interesting.
So that's why we are training it that way.
So now an appraiser's short, what happens?
Appraisal short. Okay, appraisal short can be an issue. So then we have to go back to the table and we have to start renegotiating. Some lenders already have a program where you can increase the loan to value above 80% and do a prepaid PMI mortgage insurance upfront, or finance the mortgage insurance piece into it, and then you can bring that sales price down.
Only if an appraiser's short, that's what happens.
Only if it appraises short. But even if it doesn't appraise short, some lenders have a program where they can finance that piece into it. They can finance the compensation into the loan, and do some prepaid. And if it's going to exceed 80%, they can do that prepaid MI. And it's gone, so you're not paying mortgage insurance. Yes, they will be paying extra because they're financing maybe another $20,000 of compensation, but it's allowing them to get the house, so, yes.
What's the best way to do buyer rebates and all of this?
You mean, talk to me about what you're doing on a buyer rebate.
Crediting a commission to a closing cost?
Oh, as an agent, if you're going to credit towards a closing cost?
Yeah, or credit towards, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so if you're going to, just like you do now, but you just have to make sure that lender and escrow know, because usually if you're crediting with your compensation, you're going to be memorializing that through some kind of an addendum, right, with your buyer? Yeah. If you're asking the seller for any credits, it's going to be through the contract in 3G1 because that would be a concession. Does that make sense?
That's an RPA thing, not a buyer's representation.
Correct. That's an RPA thing. So the buyer representation is only to get you paid, and you can make as little as you want. But if you want to get paid what's on that first line of what you're charging, what you're asking the buyer to be responsible for, you can credit whatever you want down below, that your broker says is okay, because I know all brokerages have a floor of how low you can go. So anyway, we're going to quickly get to the list side. We're almost finished here. This is when you're representing a unrepresented buyer. So you have the buyer that comes to you that says, I want to take my compensation off of the sales price. You know, we've all had those that come to you. So if your seller wants you to facilitate this, there is a buyer or tenancy non-agency agreement. So you can have them sign this non-agency agreement here. And also what I would give them is this quick guide, which CAR has for unlicensed assistants. Because that's basically what you're going to be doing as an unlicensed assistant. So they're going to say, well, what should I do for contingencies? I don't know. I can't tell you.
So we would be writing the contract for them, but not.
So I asked explicitly Gov Hutchins at CAR, what should we do? He said you should print a draft copy of the contract, hand it to them and say, email me all the terms you want and I will put it into zip form for you.
This
and
is a transaction
DocuSign.
broker.
It is a transaction broker in another state. See, a lot of people don't know what that is.
Right.
Yeah.
If they
So,
didn't understand it, they'd have to go and pay for a lawyer anyway.
but a lot of them won't. They're just going to say, oh no, I want to close on this date and I'm just going to leave all the defaults. So here. So you're going to get into escrow and then they're going to say, well, what inspector should I use? I don't know.
It's like a flat fee MLS
Is the seller really
service.
going to want to
Kind of.
escrow with them in the first
Well,
place?
exactly. That's where I'm going. So you want to paint this picture with the seller, so they don't even want to go down that road. So think about how the liability for the seller after 2 years after, when they discover something that they didn't get an inspection for, they're going to probably sue the seller and you. And so it's just one of those sticky things. And it's very hard to be, when you sign a non-agency agreement, you can't really do anything. You know, and the buyer's going to get tired of saying, what do you mean you can't
Regardless of
tell
how
me?
little you're doing something.
Yeah, so they're going to probably go find someone else.
Right.
It's better if they go find someone that'll write it for $500 and the liability shifts over to them.
Yeah.
It's not worth 1%.
Some brokerages were saying that they weren't gonna allow their agents to work with unrepresented buyers. So they would hope that other brokerages would also
Yeah.
cut on to that.
I like that stance.
Yeah.
Now, if a seller can tell you I don't want to work with one, and that's fine. If you don't want to work with one, that's fine too. You can tell the seller, I'm just going to pass on your listing if you want me to deal with an unrepresented buyer. But you can't fall into the fair housing trap and say, oh, well, I'm going to work with Francisco as an unrepresented buyer because I know him, but I'm not going to work with Mark. Then you can get into a fair housing problem and someone can report you, and that's federal. So we have to be careful. I think there's going to be a lot of fair housing issues with this whole new process. And so that's my presentation here. So what did I not cover for you? What are we still
Really
unclear
clear
on?
over-
It's a lot clearer
Well,
for everybody, as it should be,
Very
right?
clear, except for certain issues, like Nicole, they have 20, 30 listings at a time.
Yeah.
Open up open houses to everybody.
Yeah.
If I hold an open house for her, where's the compensation? Or we have a Redfin agreement where Redfin says, we don't want you to ask them anything. You show up, you show them the house.
Mm-hmm.
You meet with them, you call them, say, hey, when do you want to go see it?
Mm-hmm.
And you go. Where is that in there?
Well, that's going to have to be your own business practice decision. Like, for instance, the freebie that Zillow is offering.
Yeah.
Some agents are going to have a freebie that they're going to give
But you
people.
just said that's a $2,500 fine.
If someone turns you in, yes.
What if I'm showing, let's say, well, maybe you're the bad guy. I'm showing your personal house and you're
Mhm.
like, where's your representation agreement? Like, I just got this lead off Redfin an hour ago.
Yeah. That you should, if you got it off of Redfin, you should have them sign a representation agreement. There's probably going to be,
So how do you deal with Redfin?
Is there-
taking them off their
is-
They're not
platform?
going to.
Yeah, I know, but
Yeah.
I'm playing devil's
well,
advocate.
I'm sure some of those platforms will have a referral fee
Yeah.
blanket.
They're gonna have to change their policy.
Correct. They're going to have a blanket.
Play devil's
They're going to have a
advocate.
blanket
Yeah.
agreement that you're going to sign in advance. It's going to cover all those situations.
First
Yeah.
time buyers aren't going to know the process and they're just going to think this is as is.
Correct. That's why you guys really need to pause and talk to people. You know, we all get so busy. Technology has made this easy to be a side hustle anymore. because you can have this as a side hustle because you have a transaction coordinator, you've got all these other things that can be done, DocuSign, and many people have a full-time job and then they're being a part-time realtor. And those part-time realtors are the ones I hope none of you are in here that go away because they're not taking the training, you know?
Hey, I'm part-time.
No, hey, well, but you've probably sold more. I had a part-time agent, let me tell you, and when I was in Newport Beach, one of my part-time agents that was a school teacher sold more houses during the summer and at weekends than most of the other agents in the office. So it can be done.
Gotta start somewhere.
No, it can be done, you know, but not many can do it. Any other questions, guys? Because I'm here, yes.
I just wanted to mention something that another agent brought up in terms of kind of getting around this and communicating with agents and how we can get around this.
Yeah.
But he had mentioned that when you put a listing in the private remarks, when you put in your offer and say email offer to blah blah blah, they add the SPVB and the BRBC. So that's kind of like the hint, like my seller is offering.
Hey.
Like code words.
Yeah.
But that's a good. That is
because you're not mentioning concessions.
Exactly.
That's actually really smart. Yeah, like,
That's a smart idea. That's the best workaround I've ever. That's the best workaround I've ever seen because some of them I've seen 3 in like bold capital letters bedrooms. You know, there's all kinds of crazy workarounds. The other workaround, don't fall into this trap with, don't take your listing agreement for a higher fee that would include both sides and offer to pay a referral fee to the buyer's agent. That's a complete violation. Oh, our agents are thinking of that all day long. Oh, I'll just do a referral fee agreement. We're like, no, you're not.
I did a listing agreement not too long ago and did like a 5% to me.
Yeah.
And then included in the other terms compensation to the other agent to be 2.5. That was wrong.
That was wrong.
Was wrong.
Yeah. We can't do that because that's pretty much the old rules.
Exactly.
Yes.
Are there any thoughts if you're writing offers for yourself?
You need to sign a buyer representation agreement with yourself because that's how you get paid. If you're going to be requesting compensation, that's how you're going to get paid unless you're going to take it off of, but still that compensation, you're probably going to take off the sales price. I would just to be safe, just sign it. A lot of people writing their own offer usually take it off of the sales price instead of getting taxed on the comp. But you know, it's kind of up to you on how you want to do it. It's kind of weird to have to sign a buyer's representation agreement with yourself, but try to get the 4-page signed in advance. I hope I haven't said anything that goes against your guys' teachings, but yeah, he's like, okay, Wayne, you're done. Yes.
I didn't hear you answer one of his questions that he had. I know he.
Which was?
It was having like showing agents.
Mm-hmm.
People show property for you. Do they also need to sign the buyer representation form, or is that something you
Like if you have a
showing
team?
agent's name
So
on?
are you a team?
No, but I will show homes. It's kind of a generic question, but it is something I was talking to an agent about. Like, hey, so if you have somebody.
So who's gonna be getting compensated? I mean, who's gonna make?
Jonathan is the agent.
Okay.
And he's gonna have me go show a home for him.
And who's getting paid?
He's gonna kick me $100 for doing it. I don't know how that $100.
So he might be paying you a referral fee agreement or you have a different agreement with him.
Correct. So does that make me have to sign this form in addition or be added to his form? Or does it even matter? Because it's.
Not as a referral agent, no.
No. Well, talk to your broker on that one because that one is a sticky wicket too. Because let me think about it. Because you're the one.
Or if you go out of town for a weekend, you need someone to
Yeah.
watch your account.
Yeah.
What say you, Andrew?
I'm actually curious here on this. I have multiple agents and they're showing property.
Yeah.
Do I have to be on all of their BRVCs? Because I always go on the AAA when we get the contract accepted.
And so, but you don't have an additional. Are they on your team, or are they just different agents showing property
On
for
the
you?
team.
On the team. That's a good question. See, you stumped the trainer today. But I will find out for you. Well,
Maybe you just include it in the.
Yeah, so if I have like training agents right now, they're all
Yeah, because you guys are all teams. Let me just think about this for a second. Let me look at this other terms. I'm wondering in the buyer representation agreement in other terms H, if you could put team members of blah, 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 included in this agreement, because you're ultimately getting the compensation's coming to you, right? And then you're paying them out however you would do that. So I'm assuming that would be the way to do
Couldn't you
it.
just break it down in the CDA and not have that?
But I'm thinking it's the MLS violation. If the MLS called him and said, I want to see a buyer representation agreement for Mark because he showed your property, that's a good question. So I will ask.
Don't the clients always remain like clients of the brokerage, not the agent itself anyways?
They are clients of the brokerage, yes. Yes, and as we think about this further, they are clients of the brokerage.
They're agreeing with the agent, but they're signing with the brokerage anyways.
Correct, and you are a representative of the team. I'm just wondering if we have to have the additional agent signed up front.
Yeah.
Especially if you're taking credit for it.
Yeah, I think if you just do the AOAA up front, I think you're probably okay. But I'll get the clarification and let these guys know, and they can let you know as well. I will get that today after the class. Other questions, guys?
That would be the easiest way to do it.
No, because we're going to deal with the same thing because we have teams too, and I know I haven't even thought about that.
I mean, when I have agents that are like, if I'm out of town and I've got agents showing my stuff, my clients, I'm just selling them or Venmoing them.
Yeah.
$100.
Yeah. Because you're